This is me 2 years ago pushing the limits with a homemade canoe until I got kicked out of the Thames. It's time for an upgrade. I'm going to build an amphibious canoe from scratch using fabric, old bikes and wood. With it, I'll embark on a 150-mile journey across the Scottish Highlands and back, sailing and paddling one way, cycling the other, wild camping along the way. Welcome to my workshop where I started with the canoe build. The canoe's main structure was built from seasoned, knot-free Douglas fir with a straight grain. Other woods such as western red cedar are often used for smaller canoes and Sitka spruce for larger canoes. The first step in building the structure of this canoe was to laminate 3 pieces of Douglas fir together using polyurethane glue. The purpose of this lamination is to form 2 gunwale strips which form the sides of the boat. The laminated gunwales will be permanently curved, allowing the boat to have the characteristic banana shape of Canadian canoes. The aim for the design of this canoe was to create something fairly short, fairly wide and fairly deep. It needed to be short so that it would be manageable in road mode, it needed to be wide to provide additional stability when in water mode, and it needed to be quite deep to provide enough displacement to hold the bike mechanism, myself and my luggage. I settled on dimensions of 4 meters long by 81 centimeters wide and 33 centimeters deep. Just checking the symmetry with this old kite line. When the breeze isn't blowing, it is exactly where we want it to be. Bang over that centre line, which is exactly the midpoint between the 2 gunwales. I fastened the framework together using artificial sinew and dowels, creating a tough, resilient structure that also allows for some flexibility in the joints. The pre-waxed sinew grips itself after a few turns, maintaining good tension. The stems and keel strip were held in place temporarily to act as guides during the steam bending process for the ribs. The canoe's ribs were made using steam-bent green oak. It took my local timber yard over 6 months to find suitably straight-grained, knot-free planks for steam bending. While at the timber yard, I cut the planks to extract the straightest sections for creating the ribs. Other wood can be used for the ribs, however, oak tends to produce the most reliable results. I mistakenly requested the oak planks to be cut to their final thickness, leaving no extra for planing a smooth surface. So I used a belt sander to remove a small amount of material and smooth the surface before cutting the rib strips. These are all the ribs sorted and graded. This group are grade A's. They are pretty much dead straight along the grain. They do have some knots at the ends. That's absolutely fine. Those will be cut off. These are grade B's. They are good for the ribs at the end of the canoe. They've got some pin knots and some not straight grain nearer the center of the rib. So those will be trimmed off, but still very, very usable. Very good grain on those. The mortises cut into the gunwales were narrower than the ribstock. To achieve a proper fit, I carefully thinned the ends of the ribs, allowing them to smoothly insert into the mortises. This is the steam box setup. So we've got a paper stripper water boiler there, and the pipe runs down underneath, round the back and up into the back of the tube here. There is a little gap at the bottom there to allow condensed water to drip down into this bucket. And then the rest of the steam pumps up through this steam tube / steam box and out the end, vigorously. And this lid is in here really quite gently, just to make sure that the steam doesn't rush out too fast and it remains in there for long enough to heat the ribstock. Nicely wrapped up in a blanket, and the steam rate has increased and the drip rate down here has decreased, which is excellent. I found that a steam time of around 4.5 minutes was optimal for this ribstock, and overall the steam bending process was the most satisfying and rewarding part of this build. Being able to heat the wood up really quite quickly and then effectively be able to tie it into knots, and then allowing it to cool and dry to the point where it holds its shape and strength was just so deeply satisfying, and I will definitely be doing more of this on future projects. This is the first broken rib. For some reason, the steam box switched itself off a minute before it was due to come out, and I tried to bend it in any case, and it's failed. However, looking a little bit closer, I can see these teeny little pin knots just along the edge here, which probably also contributed towards this issue, because the other side is just fine. It's primarily there. So I'm going to quickly make up another rib from my spare stock and have another go at this. This rib is wanting to crack. In fact, it's just gone. That's a crack that I'm not going to come back from. That was really brittle. I've got a feeling that may have been close to sapwood or sapwood itself. Doesn't look it though. I'm not sure what's caused that. But very brittle and quite a sort of coarse, not so nice grain structure. Oh no, another one. I was just rebuilding 20 and 19's gone in exactly the same place. That is a shame. Right, another rib to rebuild. Over a year before starting this project and before I had a van, I sourced green Douglas fir from my local timber yard to reduce the costs and obtain longer lengths, which were hard to find elsewhere. After a year drying in the attic of the shed, the wood was ready to be used. I then select the best pieces and cut them into the stringers for the boat. This is rib 25, and it looks like it's a little bit too long. You can see it's lifted off the ribs either side, and actually a small difference here has a big impact near the middle and removes quite a bit of a rocker on the boat. So I'm going to try and pop this rib out and shorten the tips very slightly, and then put it back in and see if it's a better fit. It's time to get these stringers lashed onto the ribs. Currently it's quite flexible. So when I lift this tip, it's flexing by maybe ½ centimetre in the middle. By the time I'm done, it should be all tied together and much more stiff. Just been going along checking tension. Nice and tight. Similarly, not quite as tight. Good. Generally very good. Happy with that. While a standard canoe frame would be nearly complete at this stage, transforming it into an amphibious canoe requires some extra reinforcements. I strengthen the front stem and gunwales to prepare for road mode loads. The front stem was upgraded from Douglas fir to thick seasoned oak. This was the only area where I used metal fixings to secure the canoe frame together. These screws served as a backup reinforcement, preventing the gunwales from peeling away from the front stem under heavy loads. This leaking was unexpected, and it means that there's some sort of void or porosity in the glue in that gap, which isn't good really. So I popped an extra dowel in the front here to strengthen that bond. It will also have a keel strip on to keep it in place, but not ideal. Here you can see the early stages of the design for the bike mechanism, where I've placed the axle and seat in the boat to help me understand where to reinforce the gunwales. I reinforced the canoe gunnels with seasoned oak, which might not have been the best choice due to its high density and differing mechanical properties compared to Douglas fir. This mismatch could have contributed to a failure in the gunnels at the start of my attempt to cross the width of Scotland. The canoe skin is made from 840 extra tough ballistic nylon fabric supplied by Corey from the Skin Boat School. He also provided the 2-part polyurethane coating to make it waterproof. When ballistic nylon fabric is wetted, it expands and relaxes. So at the start of the skinning process, I hosed it down to completely saturate it and kept it damp through the skinning process using a fine mist spray. So the canoe's been outside in the sun for a couple of hours now, and the skin is now tightened to the point where it literally sounds like a drum. So far I've been using this to cut the nylon fabric with, but the issue with it is the temperature control is really tricky. So even now it's probably still hot enough to burn. Yeah, very hot. So as I'm trimming this off the gunnels, I can't have such a hot thing or such an uncontrollable thing. So I bought myself a electric soldering iron, which has a nice flat tip, temperature control, and was about 25 quid off Amazon. So we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna try it on its lowest temperature setting first and see how it cuts. There are some slight burn marks being left behind by the soldering iron, but I think that's only to be expected because that element needs to get hot enough to melt this, but that's probably about the burn temperature of the wood. The 2-part polyurethane from the skin boat school had been stored for nearly a year, and I noticed crystals had formed in part B. I filtered part B through cheesecloth to remove as many crystals as possible. Fortunately, the crystallization only affected part B and didn't impact part A. Applying the 2-part polyurethane was straightforward. I used a sponge roller to thoroughly saturate the surface, rolling it in different directions for even coverage. After letting it set until it reached a thick treacle-like consistency, I spread and levelled it with a levelling card. This wet-on-wet process was repeated for multiple layers. The main restrictions for this coating product is that the next layer must be applied whilst the previous coat is still tacky. If it's allowed to dry completely, then the next layer won't adhere properly. However, you don't want to apply the next coat too quickly, otherwise it will be too slippery and slick underneath and will end up in the surface drooping off the boat. This is after levelling, and it definitely looks better, but it's not 100%. I'm not quite sure what these imperfections are. They could be crystals from the urethane, they could be bubbles, but I don't think they are anymore, and they could be hairs, they could be loose fibres sticking up out of the surface, just creating a bit of surface tension. That's me done for the day. I'm going to leave this overnight and come back and put a few more coats on the underside where it's going to see most wear and tear. 14 hours later and this boat is looking amazing. There are a few surface imperfections, both from the original coating and also things which have attached themselves to it overnight. It's a little bit tacky still. There are just slight fingerprint marks left when I give it a poke, and that's absolutely fine because I want it to be able to bond to at least one more additional coat, which I'm going to apply just to this base section. This will give it some more durability and make sure that if I do bump and scrape when I am on the road, that it has a chance of withstanding those bumps and scrapes a little bit better than it would do currently. You'll notice me wearing a mask while applying the 2-part polyurethane, but it's not because of the polyurethane itself, which is pretty much odourless. I wear the mask due to mould in my workshop, which is tough on the lungs, especially with the door shut. That's the final and 6th coat on the bottom, and the final coat is super thick. And I'm hoping it isn't too thick because I've noticed that there are little sparkly things happening, probably bubbles being released. And I've also noticed that elsewhere, where I've got bits which have dropped on the floor, thin bits are sort of nice and clear. Thick bits, however, they seem to withhold their bubbles somehow. So there's a risk that if I've applied this too thickly on the bottom, that this will become a sort of creamy colour rather than clear. The tape has left this horrific mark around the edge. Either this coat wasn't set enough, which it should have been, or the tape was too sticky for this. I'm not sure.
but I've got two options. One, leave it, and two, try and get another coat on top. This boat is it's very pretty. It's done pretty well so far. I'm not sure I could quite stomach that, knowing that I could have put another coat on. So another coat, on we go. Emergency final coat is on, and it's definitely helped. There are still some slight seams there where the edge of the tape was, but that's so much better than it was earlier. So nicely done, and hopefully an even stronger skin. Just absolutely love the pale colour. Love the fact that it's translucent as well, so that the ribs can show through. And it's a really tough, thick, durable coating, especially along the bottom here. So a couple of things that I've noticed. The bottom has foamed, as I thought it might. One, because of the thickness of the coat of urethane that I put on here, really, really thick compared to everywhere else. And two, the humidity in the workshop. Humidity in there is super high all the time. And I thought I would get away with it, and did on these thin sections here, but just where I've put loads of urethane down, it really has fizzed up. For me, it's absolutely fine. The masking tape issue has pretty much entirely disappeared. There are a few teeny marks here and there. I've got to say, I think the inside is more beautiful than the outside. It's stunning. Just the lattice shape. Also the finish on this, it's come out as a nice matte finish. It's not glossy at all. But when you run your fingers over it, you can feel that it's fully saturated. So really, really pleased with that. And it's stuck. So if you look up on the inside there, if you try and push that out, it's completely glued to the stringers. Although the stringers are oiled, it's completely glued, and that's going to give it a really, really nice, strong skin structure.
While bending the brass keel strip, I was cautious of potential cracking at the screw holes, but I wasn't careful enough. I tried using heat and gravity to form the bend, which worked incredibly well. Although it is possible to bend drilled strips carefully by hand or drill the hole after bending, I found the blowtorch and gravity method was super effective and would highly recommend it. The design for this canoe was based on plans created by Brian Schultz at Cape Falcon Kayak, and I couldn't recommend them highly enough. The plans include really clear and concise equations for working out the exact dimensions for the canoe of your choice, as well as equations for working out exact rib lengths to avoid any trial and error and wastage during your build. In the next episode, I'll tackle the challenge of transforming this canoe into a truly amphibious vehicle, attaching wheels and engineering a pedal-paddle propulsion system, enabling it to glide on water and roll over land.